In this Twitch session, what I did was I created a castle tower, a very simple castle tower. It's nothing too extreme, nothing too complex, using low polygon modeling techniques, which are, again, very simple. It's basically extruding. In this case, I'm actually duplicating the body of the box underneath and using that as a reference to put the battlements on top of the tower. Now, because I'm doing this sort of freehand, I'm kind of having to figure out where the alignment is, and then I'm not really happy with the shape. So I start by adding a new box there. And what I'll do now is I'll figure a way, or I'll move the vertices around so I can actually make connections and create that into a piece. Now I want to line that up with the corner of the box, and that's why I do that connection, so I can get a snap to vertice and have that vertice snap onto the edge of the box, which I'm having a little bit of trouble because the gizmo is getting in the way. Once I'm done, I get rid of these and I move these vertices. Also, I'll have to clear those polygons in between the faces, sorry, in between the two boxes. And now this is a element itself. Now, the way that it is right now is sort of like a stylized version. It doesn't even sort of make any architectural sense. So eventually I'll have to figure a way. I'll have to move this to a point where it actually makes sense. And the reason why I was adding those connections back is that I think I'll be needing them when the time comes to do the texturing coordinates, the UVWs. So trying to figure out how I'm going to rotate this to the other side. So I think I just choose to duplicate a lot of it and then erase what I don't want. And that gives me the correct position of that piece. Even then, even after that, I'll still move things around because, again, they don't make that much sort of architectural sense, and I have to add another step underneath that, just so that it makes that it looks like it makes some sense. And there we are, adding that. I'm aligning that with the face. I wanted the corners to protrude out a little bit more than the pieces in the middle. But because this is not going to be very big or not very close to the camera, it's probably not going to read. It's going to look like a mistake. And that's why I sort of give up on that idea and just make everything line up with the interior of the shape of the tower. So you can see that the tips there poking out a little bit. That almost looks like it made some sort of mistake. And if it visually doesn't work, then, you know, just change it to something else. In this case, I'm getting rid of extra polygons that I don't need because they're going to be fiddly to work with when the time comes to do the texture coordinates. So if you can get rid of get yourself rid of some of the polygons, that just saves you time later on. So underneath all of these pieces, there are polygons that you don't need. There's another polygon there you don't need, and even the bottom one. Even that one you probably won't see. I think I do leave it though, because it's just one polygon. Now these are all different elements, and what we need to do is we need to make sure that we get a texturing going on that will give us a regular texture size or a regular resolution. And the reason being, this is going to be a pixel art texture, and the continuity of the size of the pixels is very important. So what I do is I just use a box UVW that gives me a precise size for each face. It gives me a correct relationship or ratio. So there's no face in this object that's going to have more resolution. And that's what it looks like in the UVW editor. And the UVW editor wasn't part of my stream, so I had to sort of fiddle around. Probably left some people kind of like, what's going on? So what I do in very simplistic approaches of texturing is that I make the front and back of a box be on the same UVW space as the left and right, because then I can just go in and paint a slightly darker side, and that creates the break of sides in a way that is visually perceivable without me having to use lighting at all. I'm trying to line those faces up with the rest because that kind of helps then me sort of figure out where things are. And I know that I'm going to reuse this centerpiece and the corner piece. I'm going to be reusing them all around the box. So I really don't care about the other pieces at all. I'll just delete them and then re-add them by cloning. So there's no need for me to be worrying too much about it. So as you can see, I'm sort of setting things off on the side of the UVW environment. And at this point, I think I'm kind of just sorting things out. Where are they going to go? But I'm not happy with the way the UVWs are going to be set, because there's a huge waste of space there. As you can see, there's almost a fourth of. In another situation like an organic model, that would be fine. But in this case, this is not an organic model. This is an architectural thing. And it's very odd that you weren't able to save more texture space. So I'm kind of figuring ways that I can make things look closer and closer, sort of packing everything better so that I can improve the resolution on the texture. The resolution on the texture I haven't decided. What I'm going to get it out of 128 by 128 pixel texture. I think that's how big it is. It might be a different size. I don't recall right now. But then you just export this. You didn't see because, again, I wasn't sharing that tiny image. You get to export this into a new image, which I'm using. In this case, I'm using Photoshop. And I'm going to be going back and forth from Photoshop to 3ds Max. What I'm using here is just using a noise texture to check on the resolution of the 3D model. How is the texture going to be on a 3D model? And I think that's what I'm doing, except I forgot to change the stream. And there we go. Here's the resolution. So this is the pixel density that I have on this 3D model, right? So I know kind of what kind of details can I do. I can maybe make a crack on the wall, but I won't be able to do any sort of like maybe grass, or unless they're really big and cartoony, I won't be able to do them in any elaborate way. Placing big elements on the scene is a good way, or at least on the drawing, is a good way to get scale right away. Okay, so it's nice for you to be able to just figure out how big things are going to be, how big is a rock going to be, how big is a stone, and that will give you sort of a scale for the overall aspect of your drawing, or of your, in this case, texture. It also establishes light. In this case, I'm already putting a shadow underneath. And it might not look like it belongs, but as soon as I start adding other rocks to this texture, then it becomes contextualized. You can kind of look at this and go, yeah, that's just a window. Okay, as you can see there on the model, it kind of starts adding that scale, that perspective, and now you can see that the resolution that I have on my texture is not immense, but it'll probably be enough to render out details. I think I'm painting a little bit more in Photoshop, but I forgot to switch, because the way I have this set up, I have two different scenarios, and I switch from Photoshop to 3D Studio Max, but I just forget, and then I eventually save in Photoshop, and then the texture magically will appear here. Probably explaining what I'm doing in Photoshop, but since I don't remember what it is. Oh, there we go. I added some rocks to the edge and some noise on the bottom. And this is what it looks like in Photoshop. So adding these rocks is very simple. You just do a shadow line, and then you do a bright line on the light source direction and a shadow on the opposite, and that creates a bump on your texture. So it's really not too complicated. Adding those little speckles there, those noise things, that's just to break the flatness of the surface. It's not a lot of detail, but it's enough that it doesn't look like it's a perfectly plastic surface, that it has absolutely no problem with it. Again, I probably forgot to do the switch, so something's going to show up on that. Hopefully that right face there. Doing the separation from one face to the other, and being that this is pixel art, but not really like old style pixel art. What I do is I just use a layer on top of the other side of the texture as a way to create a different shade. And I leave that to the end because it doesn't. I don't want to be bothered with that right now. Lining up the walls with each side to make sure that the rocks fit is not really that hard, especially in pixel art, because it's a matter of moving up or down 1 pixel. What I'm explaining there, what I was explaining there was that I want to be able to do, this is a tower that's going to be sitting next to a wall. So I want to be able to do a door where people can get in, and then eventually have another piece of texture, even in this texture, that I can use as the wall, as the sort of the entranceless piece of wall. And you can see that there's the door there for the tower. There's a little poking hole so you can shoot your arrows through at the top. I'm making this edge not as bright because I think it's standing out a little too bit, and that's a bit better. But what I should do is I should extend the shading of the stones over the edge. So as you can see, it's not a very complicated process. And what's happening here is just basically Photoshop saving, going to 3ds Max, Photoshop saving, going to 3ds Max, and there's not a lot going on in terms of figuring things out. It's pretty much just respecting the model. You kind of have to figure out what the model will allow you to do and what won't. In this case, I'm sort of lining up those highlights which will going to be the edge of the model, and those match and they should match on the other side as well. And I want the textures to not flow from the top stones onto that ledge, because there's supposed to be two different sets of stones. So I can create that sort of line in between that will add the separation. Again, adding a little bit of details, is almost like small dents on the stones by using a dark and a bright shade. And you do that by getting the bright shade on the bottom and then having a corresponding dark shade above, and that creates a sort of tiny hole effect. I want to copy this down because I am going to use the same sort of texture effect on the other side of the tower for the same sort of piece. And the trouble now is going to have to be matching the top pieces here. The top pieces, they will be the most shaded at this point because they are facing up, unlike any other part of the model. And because they're facing up, the color that they have is going to be very different from any other colors on the rest of the model. So that makes them stand out too much and kind of breaks the perception of volume. And especially since I don't have the roof of the tower also shaded in that color. So that's not helping. So that's a process that and that's why you should never go into too much detail in a certain area before you sort of solve the other areas in terms of basic shading. So the first thing I should have done is just shade each of these faces for the model so that I get a good relation of color and of shadow. This is me trying to figure out the corner piece there. What kind of color is it going to have, and how much do I want it to be shaded and to make sense in terms of shading. So and in this case, these faces they don't work well, so I changed them on the UVWs to a different part of the texture. And by doing that, I'm able to get the outside look of the stone and the inside shadow of the corner piece, which is also quite nice. Here I'm figuring out, I think I'm solving a little problems of misalignment on the UVWs. This is some light poking through the edge, flowing into the top of the tower. But the top of the tower is supposed to be way brighter because it's facing up. So the color that I just added there as almost like light pushing through, that should be the base color for the whole tower top. And then have a slightly brighter one if I wanted to. And that's what I just did there. I just changed that color to be, so it's a brighter one. It was a little too exaggerated, so. And there we go. Now that helps the stone pieces kind of match. And here I get rid of everything that isn't that piece, that isn't texture actually, and I just recreate the rest. And as you can see, with the top of the tower being a little bit brighter, it actually reads a bit better that it has that specific volume. I'm adding a little bit of small shading details, like making the intersections a little bit darker. But in the end, the idea is that you're able to get volume just by shading the different facets of the model. I'm having a go with a gradient map, trying to get some different tones out of this image. And I'm not sure if I even settled for anything different to what was original. Like the difference is not going to be too accentuated, but I do end up with something like this, which gives me enough volume for the model. And there's enough contrast on the texture on the sides of the walls, which also works as a pixelated texture style. And that's basically it. It's basically creating a very simple object using a pixel art texture. So it's basically modeling low poly and then jumping back and forth, checking what you're doing with a perspective. So I'll see you guys.